down the witch's road.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Agatha All Along. The first two episodes of Agatha All Along have aired on Disney Plus. We're going to be talking about them. There's going to be 9 episodes total. They're going to air weekly on Wednesdays. In order to have this conversation, we are going to spoil everything for the MCU up until this point. So just FYI, if you haven't seen like the most recent Phase 4, Phase 5 movies, we're probably going to be talking about some of the stuff that happened in them. So just wanted to warn you in advance. But real quickly, Patrick Klepek, in one sentence or so, do you think people should watch Agatha All Along?
Low stakes, fun characters, utterly charmed by this show, and I'm delighted to see where it goes next. I don't know what its ceiling is, but I think its floor is pretty high, and I'm just enjoying watching it all play out.
I'm also having a great time. It feels pretty standalone. It feels pretty inconsequential to MCU Phase 5. And those
inconsequential, complimentary.
Yeah, complimentary, non-derogatory.
And we can get into that, but I think it is crucial. So I think part of what is making this show work so far.
Absolutely. So I am currently at a recommend. I will say, Patrick Klepek, I have had my heart broken by more MCU shows than not, and I would say most MCU shows actually start really strong. They do a pretty good job of nailing the pilot. The pilot always looks expensive. And then eventually they lose their way. I would say the majority of them, in my opinion, have lost their way. So I'm not saying, I cannot say for sure whether you should watch it, but based on these first 2 episodes, I'm quite enjoying the show so far. So anyway, those are our overall thoughts on whether you should watch Agatha All Along. Now, Patrick Klepek, before we even get to the show itself, there is I think this is the first time I've seen this logo. Maybe it's appeared before, but there is a new Marvel television intro for this show. I don't recall seeing this on like Loki or anything, right? Or
what was the one they were putting on?
There was
Echo?
a Marvel Spotlight was the Echo one.
Marvel Spotlight was the first pivot to you don't need to know. This is not connected to the movie stuff. And then this more represents a second pivot, which is a reshaping of how, in theory, how Marvel has pitched it publicly, their actual like production pipeline, creative pipeline. Like this is something separate and different, and we're doing, story Bibles and yada yada yada. So yeah, you're right. I think this is the first time we've seen it formalized. But I think the question that's been in front of us has been, okay, but these are new processes you came up with to affect shows after Agatha All Along. What will this mean for a show like Agatha All Along that is kind of coming out midstream as Marvel figures out how it does television in the future?
I mean, can you theoretically watch Agatha All Along and not have seen any MCU shows and still enjoy it? Technically, yes. I think, there's a lot of great chemistry between the cast. Most of the characters are new. And so I think, like, in general, the answer is probably yes. But it does theoretically rely, I would say, heavily on WandaVision. Like, it just would be really nice for you to know what happened in WandaVision to understand Agatha All Along. And then to a much lesser extent, to have seen Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. That's like less important, but it's hard for me to imagine someone watching this show without having watched WandaVision first. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it's funny because I have a lot of friends that, watched a lot of the Marvel stuff and then post Endgame have found themselves in a sort of, well, sometimes I watch this, like sometimes like a lot of people watch, Deadpool and Wolverine, but have not necessarily kept up with everything coming out of Marvel's output. And that's a pretty common sort of thing. And some of those people know that I watch everything, just I would keep up with it regardless of this podcast. But if they know that I do stuff like this, like, hey, like thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, do I need to, like, Secret Invasion, thumbs down. And I think part of the question here is less, does this show function as something holistically entertaining if you've never engaged with the MCU? Because I think the actual question in front of the show is this show entertaining if you're sort of a lapsed fan or like someone who's just dipping in and out? You're not keeping up with everything, but like, yeah, I've watched some of these movies. I've watched some of these TV shows. And I think so far on that level, yes, like it's tricky in the beginning because there's some premise setting.
Yeah.
And I think the show does is acknowledging that, like the way they set up the show and the meta framing is doing its darndest to like, how can we drag you into this show with an interesting thematic framing before we got to do some lore stuff like about like why it's all happening in the first place.
Because like WandaVision was like pretty complicated, I would say, just in terms of the lore and all the stuff that happens in it, right? And so they need to convey all that. They do attempt to like explain all that. It has been over 3 years since WandaVision debuted, right? And so it's like, okay, we got to catch people up to some degree. They do that a little bit, but I think you're right, Patrick. If you're like, I'm vaguely familiar with what happened in WandaVision, you're probably fine. I'm vaguely aware of what's going on in the MCU, you're probably fine. They do kind of recap a lot of stuff for you, but for me, I will say it would be hard for me to imagine. And I'll also say this. I'll say this: the bulk of this season, how it's shaping up to be, looks like it's pretty much completely unrelated to anything else happening in the MCU. Like, that's the bulk of it. It's just really the setup that I think is going to be a little tricky to get over. And once you're over the setup, you're fine. It's going to be fine. You'll understand everything that's going on. So, overall, I'd say you can watch it even if you haven't seen any MCU stuff. But yeah,
and if you're a big Catherine Hahn fan, like I could like if I knew like if that was like one of those actors, like man, when she really goes for it, I just like watching her be on screen. I mean, this show like really lets her play like in a really fun landscape and palette. So if that is like an actor that you're particularly keen to, and your Marvel. Maybe like a lot of people like, I was kind of done after Endgame. I'm cool. I don't need to keep up with this world anymore. And I hear it's a pretty mixed bag anyway. I will say like it's worth getting over the hurdle of what's going on if you just want to watch an actor just eating up the screen, because that she is doing that to and a lot of the characters, a lot of the actors are here, but her especially, she seems to be having a wonderful time, and I'm enjoying how much she's bouncing between tones.
All right. Well, let's talk about what actually happens in the show, Patrick Klepek. So, when we last left Agatha Harkness, she was trying to manipulate Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, into doing her bidding. But Wanda figured out her game and turned the tables on Agatha, imprisoning her mind in a psychological version of Westview, which is like the place that they were chilling at in WandaVision, where she was doomed to kind of be some version of her nosy neighbor self indefinitely. Basically being psychologically tortured forever. It's actually very chilling. I thought this has happened at the end of WandaVision. Do you remember, you ever watch that movie, The Lawnmower Man? Very terrible movie.
Yeah, better short story than or novella, I think.
There was that
movie.
scene where like he like puts this lawnmower inside this guy's brain, and then like he's like, now the Lawnmower Man is in your brain forever. That's basically what I felt when Agatha was imprisoned at the end of WandaVision. Was like, oh, now you're forever trapped to be in this dystopian suburb.
Well, they don't really paint it out, right? You just know that she's just been trapped, and then part of what this show does is try and answer what does it mean for her to be trapped, and it kind of fills in those blanks. And I think does it like it's very chilling at the end of WandaVision, and I think it's kind of interesting the humor they find in like, well, if you were in a psychological prison you couldn't break out of, what would it be?
Yeah, and we certainly get a glimpse of that in this episode of the show. So in episode 1, Seekest Thou the Road, and then episode 2, Circle Sown with Fate and Unlock Thy Hidden Gate, we learn exactly what Agatha was going through. Sadly, Wanda Maximoff died during the events of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, destroying all copies of the Darkhold along with her. And I'll explain a little bit more about what the Darkhold is later on. So when Agatha All Along begins, we open with Agatha playing a woman named Agnes, seemingly a detective in a police procedural, a television show. I think this is basically it's the TV show. We haven't get an opening credits, and I'm pretty sure it's a take on Mare of Easttown. It's called Agnes of Westview, and this whole police procedural thing goes on for 20 minutes before it's revealed that she's really just under a spell and someone's trying to get her out of it. So yeah, I'm curious if you had any reaction to this, Patrick. I was really confused. I was wondering, like, where is this going? Turns out it's just an homage to WandaVision, I think, right? Like, I don't think like every episode's going to begin with a new TV show. It's just, it was an homage to how WandaVision took us through the different kind of eras of TV. And one era of TV is, hey, all these sort of crime shows, including Mare of Easttown. What was a little odd to me was I think it was actually like kind of a mix of not just Mayor of Easttown. Like the title Agnes of Westview is clearly Mayor of Easttown reference, but it had an opening credit sequence, which Mayor of Easttown did not have. And so it felt like True Detective really was mixed in there as well, like a very True Detective inspired opening credit sequence.
That, and there's the line that really got me was there's also a habit in Hollywood of taking successful television, like foreign television shows, and then remaking them here. And there's a line in the intro to Agnes of Westview, which is like based on the Swedish television show or something like that.
Like, that was very good.
I mean, that's the fun parts of like early WandaVision before it turns into, people blasting each other. Like there was a real attention to detail in, hey, we're not just making it black and white. We're trying to like, what were some of the tropes of that era? And like, there was a real sense that they appreciated and were trying to honor like what was interesting about that kind of filmmaking. And I don't know that like this little bit gets quite to that level of detail, but that line there was like, well, that person knows what they're talking about.
Like, I love
that really spoke to me as someone that like, like keeps up with the trades, knows that a show is like most people don't realize that like a show is, reinterpreting a work, but I know that. And so having that line there was like, you know what you're doing here with this little sequence.
It was great. And I just impressed with how much work they put into it. Like they did a whole opening credit sequence with song and thought all that stuff. And they're probably not going to use it again. Right?
I mean, it's not 5 minutes. Like that's what I also appreciate. Like it's a good, most of the the opening up, at least half of the opening episode is leaning into the audience being like, all right, well, okay, we know this isn't what the show is. Like, when are we going to break? And the show has some fun with how long are we going to let this framing device last? And I think they get just the appropriate amount of mileage out of it, where her kind of really over the top cop like persona that she's taken on, which is a lot of fun, but I think at a certain point would probably not, it wouldn't sustain, but they get just enough out of it that they hit the right level.
Agreed. So I think it's safe to say Patrick and I are both big fans of the way this show opened.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, at some point, Agatha awakens from her spell and she discovers it was a teenage boy who awakened her. When she asks for the boy's name, she can't understand anything he says, probably because of some magic stuff that we're not aware of yet. Meanwhile, there's another witch named Rio Vidal, played by Aubrey Plaza, who really wants to make Agatha's life miserable. They have a huge fight in modern day Westview, where Agatha awakens to in her kitchen in her house. And there's a ton of sexual tension between them.
I was going to say that was the thing that I found most notable about the tone. Like, I've seen, already this show is like part of the culture wars, and like, some people being like, it's the gayest, MCU production ever. And then anyway, all that aside, the show itself, I mean, the first encounters between these two characters are like dripping with like sexual tension, like in a way they're like, oh, they're just doing this for a minute. It's like, oh no, like this is the entire scene. And it does a lot of work to imply probably a history between these characters. And I don't know where the show is going to go with all that. Hopefully it's not just like baiting, like queer baiting people. I like look at these characters like they probably had sex at one point in their centuries of being together, but we're not going to do anything with that in the show. That would be disappointing. But I appreciate from the start the show. I mean, MCU is sexless, right? Like that's just not something that is part of the storytelling and the emotional states of the characters in that world for like very deliberate reasons. It's a choice they've made to not engage with that broadly, other than like Tony Stark is popular and has sex with young women, really. So I did appreciate that part of it. Again, not knowing where it goes, what the payoff will be there, but to have that present in an MCU show from the gun, it's like, hey, like these characters have a history, and we're going to make it very obvious in the way they're playing off one another. That was a lot of fun.
I agree. I think Aubrey Plaza is great in the show. I think Aubrey Plaza's outfits are great in the show. Like when even when she's just an FBI agent, and then she kind of barges into Agatha's house. Unclear to me why she is here at Agatha's house at this particular point in time. Do you remember if that was explained at all? Like, I know why the guy was looking, like the teen was looking for Agatha. Like he's just a fan and he's tracked her down.
Well,
But, like,
she seemed like she, you get the sense that she also wants Agatha to break out of this spell that she's under, but isn't necessarily giving her the tools to do so. Whereas for this, the teen, as I think it is referred to in the credits, like this character has not been
teen
formally
teen.
revealed.
Yeah.
It actually goes through the motions to like cast a spell that can help Agatha get released from the prison that she's in. But I think it's something to be explored. Like clearly Agatha has they call her a witch killer at one point. It's not well liked in the witching community.
Yes,
and
you get a sense of, this is like how if you went back to the Predator's homeworld, like that guy would probably not be very popular. You know how like you get like think about the Predator. He's like that guy that goes like shooting boars during the weekend that are like station like he goes shooting, but it's those kinds of the hunting where the animals are served up to you to shoot. You know what I'm saying? Like then he comes back and he talks about how hard it was, and he talks about his guns all the time at work, and you'd be like, I don't want to hang out with that guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's basic. That's the Predator in the Predator universe. Because why would somebody with advanced like alien technology come to Earth and mess around with primitive humans? Yeah, that's just not a cool thing to do if you think about it. Anyway, that's basically Agatha. Like Agatha has that reputation among witches. I think she's like killed witches. It sounds like almost like
she's absorbed their powers, which I don't remember. It's been a minute since I've watched WandaVision since it came out. I can't remember if that was established in her power set, at all. Probably was, but that is clearly, a source of tension in, witch killer could mean anything, because a great source of tension in this show is people who are still identify as witches, but no longer have access to sort of magic and power in the same way. So you kind of get this sense that something Agatha has done over the centuries is absorb the power of others and leave them like lacking an identity, yet still wanting to be part of sort of the witching community.
Yeah, that said, there are a lot of kind of rules that are introduced in this episode. So, for instance, like Rio and Agatha can't kill each other. They make a reference like, you can't kill me or something like that. They can only hurt each other or torture each other. So it's like, okay.
But is that like she physically can't die, or like it's not cool if you kill me?
Right. Unclear, kind of. I don't know. And like the Salem 7 witches show up. Like, what are they going to do to Agatha? Are they allowed to kill Agatha? Yeah,
look cool though.
Yeah, they look cool. They really look cool. Anyway, so whatever the case, like for some reason or another, Rio can't kill Agatha, and can only torture her. And then Rio Vidal says, "Hey, you know what? I'm not going to torture you right now. I'll wait till you get your full powers back. Plus, these Salem 7 witches are going to come and mess you up anyway. So, like, I don't really need to do anything." I did want to give a shout out to the part of Agatha All Along where she comes out of the spell and she starts like going through all these different versions of herself from the different TV eras. And there's one particularly cool shot where she is in black and white and the rest of the world is in color. We've seen that effect before in other movies and TV shows, but I just thought that one effect, that one moment was really well done. Like I was looking really hard to see the seams and how they did it, and I couldn't find them. They just did a wonderful job with that particular component of it. So, anyway.
Well, and it was part of what made WandaVision work so well, that it wasn't just, hey, isn't it funny to make it black and white? Like her acting shifts a little bit in that moment when she like adopts that, and she sort of like goes back to sort of like her old timey, like she kind of like strikes a pose, like harkens back to how she was playing that character in WandaVision. And
right.
So
yeah.
That was my one favorite parts. I rewatched the first episode of WandaVision in advance of this, and it was like, wow, they really committed to the bit here. And I think that's part of what makes that work, in addition to the effects being so well done.
They decide that they're going to go on the Witch's Road, right? And the idea is that the Witch's Road, at the end of the road, you get the thing that you want the most, which for Agatha is all of her powers back. And so the teen character is this guy who's just like a really big fan of Agatha. And like, he is the one that gets her out of the spell that she's in. It seems like he is a familiar and not a witch himself, is my understanding of it. like a human familiar, and so he convinces her that she should take him along, and we kind of see them interact, and their dynamic evolves as the episode goes on. I have a feeling like it's going to become an important relationship throughout the course of the series. But yeah, the rest of the episode involves Agatha putting together a coven of witches to travel down the witches' road with. She basically puts together a team like in a heist movie. Speaking of lore and rules, there is this thing called the Covenstead rule, which is that within any 3-mile radius, there will be a collection of witchy enough people to form a coven. I thought that was very clever because it's basically like, okay, Agatha needs to put together a team. She needs to put together a coven. And so it's like, how are we going to have her do that? Well, let's just make up this rule that there's witches everywhere, basically.
Yep.
Because otherwise she'd need to like fly around places and you'd be wondering like, how is she flying? I mean, I don't even know if she's allowed to leave Westview or any. Maybe she is.
When I was worried that the structure of the show is going to be, is each episode going to be about we're assembling a member of the team in a different location, and instead the show just we're going to get these characters together like pretty quickly. They're all going to have little bits, and then we're gonna. They're
all going to be within a 3-mile radius of each other. Anyway, just if you're ever having trouble figuring out a way to make it so that your characters are near each other, just invent a rule that says the characters need to be near each other. It's a great screenwriting tactic.
As long as it's funny, like you can, I bought it immediately. I was like, that's a funny rule to have. Like, fine, and there's different ways to do like arbitrary rules and world building to get you to buy into like wherever they need to move these chess pieces. And I did sort of admire that as like, oh, that's a good bit. Like that's just a funny way to accomplish some efficient storytelling that also makes you chuckle. Because at this point in the Marvel universe, we know very little about how magic witches sort of function relative to everything else. You know, Thor, Loki, a lot of how they're positioned is like, well, is it magic or like, you know, a sufficient enough advanced technology is perceived as magic. But here, this is magic. And the rule set of that is broadly, you know, if you're not I don't know how much of this is pulled from the comics and then like is here, or this is the television show spinning its own version of how magic, like pure magic, is interpreted in the MCU. But either way, I bought it sort of hook, line, and sinker and was like, if it's a small thing, but also if it ends up being representative of a much bigger thing, which is just like, this is the tone we're adopting, this is the level of seriousness we're like, we still want to tell like a good story, but if this is the wavelength the show is on that level, it gives me some confidence that what it's trying to accomplish elsewhere will also work.
Yeah, like it's not taking itself terribly seriously at times, right? And that's always good for an MCU show. Particularly for a show that's trying to strike this tone. All right, Patrick, let's talk about what happens the rest of the episode. She basically puts together this coven. I'm going to list who the people are and who the actors that play them are. There's Sashir Zamata as Jennifer Kale, who is a potions expert. I mean, the person really into like naturopathic healing is called Jennifer Kale. That's the kind of show this is, and that's cool. Patti LuPone is in the show as Lilia Calderou, who, according to her description on Wikipedia, is a 450-year-old Sicilian witch and member of Agatha's coven whose skill is divination. She finds her in a strip mall. I have to say, the scene where Agatha pretends to be a Southern woman, like a woman from the South, interacting her, it actually, Catherine Hahn's Southern accent was actually too good, like problematically good. I'm not even joking. Like, it was so convincing. Like I think in that scene you're supposed to see, oh, she's just pretending to be a woman from the South. Like, it's so good that it's like, oh, is this actually Catherine Hahn's real accent and we just didn't know it this whole time? You know, that's how good it was. So anyway, I thought that was a wonderful scene and interaction that they have. Ali Ahn plays Alice Wu Gulliver, a member of Agatha's coven who is a protector witch. And then they're still missing one witch. They still need one witch. Now, I was reading this in Caroline Sita's review of this episode over at Episodic Medium, but apparently on this list of witches that Patti LuPone's character provides, there is like one witch that's just like a black heart. And Caroline recognized, earlier in the episode, Rio Vidal says like, I have a black heart, or I have a dark heart for Agatha, or something like that. And so maybe it was Rio Vidal that was supposed to be the fifth witch, right, in the coven, but things obviously didn't work out for them. So anyway, as a result, Agatha is forced to gather somebody who is not part of the core crew. She picks. This is a little confusing. Deborah Jo Rupp, who plays Sharon Davis in the show, and it's confusing because in the original WandaVision, that same actor played a character named Mrs. Hart in WandaVision. So, but she was playing a fake role in WandaVision, and her quote unquote real name in Westview is Sharon Davis, and her real name in real life is Deborah Jo Rupp, who we've seen from like That 70s Show and many other TV shows and films. So, anyway, that is who ends up being the Coven. And as the episode ends, the Salem 7 invade Westview. Agatha is able to open a portal in her basement to the road as our Coven of Witches sets off for glory. So that is how the show ends. Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on the Coven? I think they have great chemistry with each other. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they have great chemistry. One thing I really like that both these episodes touch on is, what happens in WandaVision is like one of the scarier things that a character does to a group of other characters, because what happens in WandaVision is that like these people weren't like went blank and they're just being orchestrated by her magic. Like they were taken over and experienced these lives that Wanda was. They weren't themselves, but they sat there and experienced themselves doing things that wasn't them. And the show does go out of its way a couple times to be like how chilling that was for the residents. Like, the one neighbor across the street when Catherine Hahn is like an extended naked sequence, which was like, thank you, Catherine Hahn, for being brave enough to do something like that in a show like this. I thought it was fantastic. But like, even just they won't whisper about Wanda, or like they're deeply sensitive about like who they were in that universe. Like, it's just, I think the show does a pretty decent job of acknowledging like the chaos and trauma that conceit caused in a show. And in WandaVision itself, it explains that it happened, but it doesn't really sit with like how horrifying it was that what she did to these people. And the show can't sit with that in the same way that it wasn't going to sit with things like the snap. But I did like that it sat and it acknowledged how brutal that was to this community, even if we're about to probably leave Westview behind for the duration of the show.
I pretty much agree with you, Patrick. I think it certainly does a better job of reckoning with the events of WandaVision than WandaVision did.
Or even the follow, like, Doctor Strange just more or less sort of whoosh, we just kind of move on from it.
Yeah, I agree. It was just so odd, and it framed like Wanda's actions at the end as like heroic. Like they'll never know that you gave up enslaving these people. Like these enslaved people will never know all the good things you did by not enslaving them anymore. And it's like,
couldn't you just wipe their memories? And like that's one of those, like, use your magic. Be helpful. The last however minute period of time that you've been doing this didn't happen. Nope.
Anyway, I thought the Salem 7 looked pretty freaking cool. Like the way they shot the Salem 7, the appearance. They did this thing where they like remove frames. Like, so it feels like the Salem 7 are like jump cutting or jumping in time.
It's very there's a lot of horror film techniques that are being deployed in parts of this episode. I'm hopeful that will continue. There have been elements of horror, like, Werewolf at Night obviously like leans pretty far into that. Some of the scenes in Moon Knight, the opening episodes of that, like attempted to be kind of horror adjacent. But Agatha All Along, I think, sort of presents as the first opportunity for or another opportunity for the MCU to kind of play in a tone that it hasn't really adopted in the past. So I'm crossing my fingers. Some of the trailers have suggested some pretty gnarly stuff, and I'm hoping between like, hey, we're gonna have sexual tension, Catherine Hahn is gonna just be straight up naked during a scene, like, hey, maybe this feels a little more adult's the wrong term. Like it's of course kind of still an all ages show, but one that will allow itself to play in a slightly different tonal sandbox. And I'm hoping that continues, because the setup with all the characters, like the dynamics are, all the stuff is in place for a really fun show. Now the question is just, can it sustain that for another 7 episodes, which has not been the case many, many times over the course of the MCU.
So many times.
Even in shows that had strong starts. I mean, ironically, WandaVision, like the first show, probably had the most sustained success of any of them before it sort of lost the plot at the end. So it's, who knows where Agatha ends up.
Yeah. And let's just talk a little bit about that briefly, right? Which is, this feels like pretty inconsequential to the MCU. Like, okay, the question is whether Agatha's going to get her powers back. Like, I don't think Agatha is going to be, we've seen like what the MCU has coming up next, Avengers Doomsday and Fantastic Four. Like, maybe Agatha might be in a post-credit scene, but like, I just don't, maybe she'll be in the next Doctor Strange movie whenever that freaking happens. But like, I just don't think it's really going to end up mattering that much. And I actually think, I hope that is liberating for the creators of the show, right? Like that's my feeling, is like the stakes are relatively small. Does Agatha get her powers back at the end? And I think the show has done a decent job of making us care about that, just because of how charming all these characters are. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to the MCU whether she does. And I think that's great. So any other thoughts on that, Patrick?
That's how television should, like, that's how I hope the MCU operates going forward, is use the television format to tell interesting stories. And if you succeed at doing that, you will also succeed in your goal of establishing a character that then can come into the films in like a meaningful presence. And then you can point back to that, but it doesn't have to feel so intertwined. And like, this is where I hope like the MCU can maybe find its footing, because I think that's a better dynamic between this, like the theatrical stuff and the television stuff. Like, just tell a good, fun Agatha story. And if you get to the end of that and it's like, shit, these characters are really fun, let's like go find it. Let's conjure another adventure for them to go on, instead of, yeah, but she's supposed to be in the next Doctor Strange, and so we can't, like, we got to rush 2 seasons of storytelling into this. Like, hopefully it's 9 episodes that are good to tell this story. And then you're left, man, like I'd watch another season of that, 18 months from now. So hopefully that's where they're headed. Whether that is the show, remains to be seen. But you and I we've been beaten before by these shows, David, but we're just getting back up again to be knocked out.
I would say this one has the most promise, honestly.
I agree. The most in a while.
Like, out of any show I've seen, this one has the most. I feel like maybe we're going to get to the end and feel like that was a well-told story and it didn't have too many MCU ties. Like, I would say like the opposite of that would be Secret Invasion, where it was really awkward because you had this whole plot where, huge world-changing things happen, but at the end of the series, we need to basically reset things to status quo for Samuel L. Jackson's character because he needs to be in the Marvels.
And at a certain point, off some of one of the best B-C level characters, like Ben Mendelsohn's character. Like, let's just kill him off in this TV show nobody watched, so we can't use him again. Like, Ben Mendelsohn, one of those actors that can sell bullshit to you. Like, he can say anything in these movies, and you're like, yeah, I buy what you're selling, buddy. And so I
mean, Kobe Smulders as well, So
yes,
spoilers for Secret Invasion, but yeah, those are 2 characters that died during that show, and it's like. And at the end of it, they got to be like,
what?
And for what? For what? As Samuel L. Jackson went back to his own planet after that, It's like, okay, right? But he created all these horrible problems. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. So
the most powerful mutant is out there right now. She can be anybody from this universe. We're never going to talk about that character again. She was shoved into a car and she never to appear again.
This is a show where it feels like, hey, they can truly be free. Like, no one is going to care where Agatha ends up at the end of this. And hopefully it's somewhere satisfying. And hopefully they know where that is, even at the beginning of the show. So anyway, I'm hopeful.
Same.
As for Decoding TV's coverage, I think the way we're going to do this is we're going to cover Penguin next week as our main topic. And we'll plan to check in on Agatha All Along every week. We'll have a little segment at the end where we just talk about how is the show going? What are we thinking about the show? And we'll see how it evolves. And probably for the finale, we'll do a more full conversation. If you're watching on YouTube at youtube.com/@decodingtv, hit like and subscribe. There's this new thing, Patrick, called Hype. Have you heard about this?
No.
people can do something that's not just like or subscribe. They can hype your video.
Oh.
And
Does that push it up the algorithm or something?
What's cool. Yeah, it does do that. And what's cool about it is you have to have less than 500,000 subscribers. So it's not like
nailed it. I could do
nailed it.
there.
Absolutely. And I think users only get a few hypes per week. So they have to like decide how to allocate the hypes. Anyway,
that's a cool idea.
Yeah, if you see this podcast on YouTube at youtube.com/@decodingtv, give us a hype in addition to a like or subscribe. All right. He's Patrick Klepek. I'm David Chen. See you next week for more conversation about Agatha All Along as well as The Penguin. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.